Welcome to week 4 of Building Blocks. We're going to talk tonight about navigating the child waiver programs here in the state of Colorado. Again, I'm Luke Whelan with the ARC Arapahoe Douglas counties. This is our youth, so essentially grade school, middle school training for families and individuals to learn the child system in the state of Colorado around waivers and programming for kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities. This is being recorded in the fall of 2020. So tonight, we're going to go through waivers. We're going to talk about how to choose a waiver, eligibility for child waivers, compare and contrast them, understanding the steps of how to apply and some of those barriers around that, and then the basic funding for each of the waivers. So to start off, how to choose an HCBS waiver for your child. These are some general questions you need to start asking yourself. What is your child not able to do with that another child their same age can do? That age component is really important. We'll talk about that in a moment. When walking, do you have to hold their hand? Are they a run risk? Do they fall a lot? How much do they rely on friends and family to take care of your child due to his or her unique needs? Services, what services are you hoping to gain? For instance, does your child need in-home care, therapies for behaviors, respite care for yourself? Are they able to use the bathroom by themselves? So like we talked about in the first week, start thinking about the things that you automatically do or prep your child to do. Those are some of the things that are going to help you understand which waiver is best to pick. So a little bit of a refresher, again, remember Health First Colorado is Colorado Medicaid, and that's the medical model, it's the medical side. So everyone that's approved for Medicaid has access to these services, along with some other ones with some referrals, but you have access to that. Then if your son or daughter has an intellectual disability, they might be eligible for what we call home and community-based services, or waivers, which are designed to allow individuals at risk for institutional placements. There aren't any institutions here in the state of Colorado for children. We did that years ago, but they're still at risk. It's an archaic term, but we still use it. And they're at risk for that level of care, typically either through a hospital, nursing facility, or an immediate care facility, meaning that they have a lot of medical issues. So their disability or their medical conditions might be the qualifying factor for getting into a waiver. We'll talk about the difference in all those waivers here in a moment. So your child's going to have, for any of the waivers, to do what's called a long-term care assessment. This is done by the entry point, so be it a single entry point or a community center board, depending on which waiver, and we'll talk about which one does which. And they are going to talk about daily living activities related to your son or daughter's age: bathing, toileting, eating, dressing, mobility, transferring, memory and cognition, behavioral issues, to get an assessment to essentially see if they are functionally eligible for the HCBS waivers. Again, case managers at single entry points or community center board will meet with you, typically in person. During COVID, that's not necessarily doing them online, but to do this long-term care assessment. So again, talked last week about getting Medicaid and how that's important. And so once you're in Medicaid, then we can look at these waivers. And so in doing so, once you make contact, you're going to go through this assessment that's going to talk about their daily living skills. So like we talked about in the first week of this training, starting to record things, keeping a notebook in the kitchen, writing things down as you do them for your son or daughter, what they do, what their behaviors are, what they're looking at, their interests, all those little nuances. This is the time that we want you to bring out. This is the time I want you to explain it to people. Pull that notebook out and start rattling off that they can't make any of their own food. They need food cut up into small bites because they don't chew well. They can't use a fork, but so you have special utensils or special dishes. They need help in the bathroom at all times, either because they have medical conditions of like their catheter, they don't have mobility, or they don't function well in the bathroom or have some issues when it comes to using the restroom. So those are all those things, and what happens when they have a behavior. How many times you check the front door to make sure it's locked so they don't run out. All those different things. This is the time we really want to explain those to a case manager. So when you're doing that, you also have to remember about milestones. So age and stages are very important when it comes to child waivers, because every kid goes through these age and stage milestones. And so your kid might be delayed in that because of their disability. So really, when you're thinking about things, you're looking at, can your son or daughter do X or Y or Z at the same level as someone their typical age? So a typical 4 or 5-year-old could still be struggling with potty training. That's, not every kid is potty trained at, really early on. Some kids struggle with it. So that's not a sign of that's something that they have a disability of, and we need to report that. That could still be looked at as an age milestone that they just haven't crossed yet. But if your kid's 9, 10, 11, 12, and they're still, having to use it, diapers, or they're not potty trained, that's a definite milestone they didn't reach at that time yet. So again, gauging your child's milestones related to others of their actual age or developmental age is very useful. So think of those things. A typical, 4-year-old probably can't make their own meals. They still struggle to maybe open bags and things, to get food, to get snacks out. But a typical 9-year-old should be able to, maybe get things off the counter, fruits on the counter, eat, wash it, or open a bag of chips, or those different, things that, based on their age, they're able to do. So, and case managers will take that into effect. They'll think about that while they're doing that long-term care assessment, which is, again, done to get into the waivers and then redone every year. So, choosing a waiver. You should have all got this in an email. For those of you watching this that weren't on this, please reach out to the ARC Arapahoe Douglas and we can get you this sent to you, or you can find it at Health First Colorado. This is the state's waiver choice chart. So it kind of walks you through. So like your functioning criteria, like does your child require care that would typically be provided in an institution, meaning they need a lot more support than kind of an atypical kind of kid. No, then they might essentially, that's going to push you down to like, just getting some Medicaid determination stuff, but not getting into a waiver. If it's a yes, you're looking at, is it, is it a serious health concern, or is it more intellectual, developmental, behavioral concerns? So again, your kid could qualify for both of those. So if it's a yes, you move to the next column. So we're in the purple boxes now. And that kind of lines you up with who you're going to call. Is it a community center board because of the disability, intellectual and developmental disability, or is it the medical conditions and a single entry point? Now, luckily here in the state of Colorado, our systems can talk to each other. So if you go to a single entry point and they go through and they talk about all the waivers they can offer and see if you're eligible, they're also probably going to throw out the idea of, well, if they have an intellectual and developmental disability, there's just one other waiver they might qualify for. So, or two waivers, so it just depends. So again, whichever entry point you go to, community center board or single entry point, then you're moved on to, if your son or daughter meets that targeting criteria, which we'll talk about because it's specific to each waiver. And then they're going to talk to you about, is your child in the foster care system or at risk? This is a lot dated. At risk of, the families in major crisis. We'll talk about what that looks like. They can go into the CHRP or Children's Habilitative Residential Program waiver. Is it a lot of interventions every 2 to 3 hours overnight? They don't sleep through the night. They have a lot of behavioral issues and medical concerns, maybe even. And they're the most in need. So they might qualify for the Children's Extensive Support Waiver. Those two waivers are specifically designed for kiddos with intellectual and developmental disabilities. If you're down in the single entry point, is it your child, do they have eligible for Social Security, or you make too much money to qualify for Medicaid as a family or for your child, but you also need support above and beyond, like medical, typically medical. Your child might be eligible for the Children's HCBS waiver. It's the only waiver that technically is not within you don't have to have Medicaid to access. If your child could qualify for Medicaid or Social Security, and they have what's considered a life-limiting illness, then they could maybe qualify for that children with life and living illness waiver. So this flow chart, then there's another flow chart about once you're in a waiver, then it's trying to figure out what you can get from that waiver. So these are the services kind of broken down pretty simply for does your child have Medicaid? Yep. If you do, you move on to if no, but they still can access that children's HCBS waiver even without Medicaid. So that might be something to look at. But we'll go over to the purple boxes on the right-hand side of the screen. As you can see, CES benefits, there's a whole list of those, like within specific to that waiver. And there's a whole list of CHRP benefits. Then there's the state benefits plan. So remember, that's in the middle box there. That's the plan that anyone that has Medicaid has access to. Now, some of those take, speech, OT, they might take referrals. EPSDT is where behavioral therapies live, kind of things like that. So again, that's just if you have Medicaid. Then for beyond Medicaid, remember the house scenario. Having Medicaid gets you in the house. Getting in a waiver gets you into one of the rooms of that house, specific to your child's needs. So we'll go through all of these services here in a moment. But these are the two forms from the state that you can look at to kind of help plan your route if you wanted to think of it that way. So the first waiver we're going to step into is the Children's HCBS waiver, or Children's Home and Community-Based Services waiver. So this waiver provides home and community-based alternatives for children with significant medical needs who are at risk of being in a hospital or a nursing facility. Essentially, that without these services, your son or daughter might need to be in and out of a hospital pretty often, or be like living in a skilled nursing facility because their medical needs are so high. What this waiver does is, again, your kiddo has to meet some of the financial criteria. Essentially, it's that if your son or daughter in your family is not eligible for Medicaid, but you don't actually make a ton of money, so there's kind of a little gap space there, you could qualify for this waiver along with your kiddo having a lot of medical needs. So your children, you're gonna have to do a long-term support services level and be typical of what would, if they didn't have these supports in the home, they might be in a medical facility. And then they might have to meet the definition of a disability. So they still have to have some kind of a disability, be it medically disabled or intellectual and developmental disability. There are families that are on the Children's HCBS waiver with kiddos with IDD because the benefits of this waiver have a lot of that medical component that families can like to access. With that, here's some of the financial piece. So, your child's income must be less than 3 times the federal Social Security limit per month. And the child's assets can't be more than $2,000. Now, due to your family's income, your child will not otherwise be eligible for Medicaid. So again, this is the only waiver you don't need Medicaid to access. So it's essentially built for families that make too much money for Medicaid, but their kiddo needs a lot of help, needs a lot of support with their medical system. There's really only 2 services underneath this waiver, and it's case management and then what we call in-home support services. We'll talk about that in a moment. How you apply through a single entry point for this waiver. So if you're in the Denver, Arapahoe, Douglas, Elbert County, Adams County area, you're going to apply through Rocky Mountain Human Services. If you're in anywhere else in the state, we want to look up your single entry point. So that the main service is in-home support services, or IHSS, which essentially lets you manage the attendants, the people that are providing personal care, homemaker, and the health maintenance services to your child. So what it does is there's 3 services under IHSS: personal care, someone coming in and helping your kid do bathing, toileting, dressing, eating, the personal care activities, ADLs throughout the day that you do on a regular basis. So it's someone else doing that, or someone within your own home that's over the age of 18 can do it also. So there's homemaker services, which are cleaning, general cleaning of the house, of the area your loved one utilizes. So the living room, kitchen, things like that. They're not going to clean like your bedroom, unless that's where your son or daughter spends most of their time to either maybe watch TV or do their schoolwork because it's isolated, or because your bathroom has a 0 threshold, so they don't need to climb over a tub or whatever. So they could clean your bathroom because your son or daughter uses it, and that's part of their disability. The big component in home support services is the health maintenance tool. This is the tool that most families utilize, essentially, that allows them to have people paid to do skilled healthcare related tasks. Things like changing a catheter, changing a tray, positioning, suctioning, skilled care. So there's unskilled care, helping with some minor bathing, toileting, and then there's skilled care, which is like taking care of things that if you don't do it, the person might die from not having it done, or have a very serious illness or infection or something. So that's really one of the easiest ways that I can always explain to families of unskilled care is kind of brushing your teeth, helping your kid floss. Those are unskilled tasks. If you don't do it, it's not the best for you, but you're not going to die tomorrow from an infection if you don't brush your teeth today. If you don't change a catheter, that's going to be a pretty nasty problem coming up. So that's a skilled care task. Well, under the state law, you have to be a CNA or an LPN or a registered nurse to do those skilled tasks. Unless you access through health maintenance, we waive what's called the Nurse Practice Act, and allows anybody that you feel is determined eligible to do this job, you can hire, train them, and without having to send them through school to get certifications or licensing. So, your respite provider, someone, a family friend, your adult other child, or neighbor down the street, or anyone really that's over the age of 18 that you are training to do the skilled tasks. So you're taking on a little bit of that liability of teaching them how to change these things and do these things that you've probably done a ton. So, and this person's there often, with this in-home support services, they're there a lot. So there's caps and funding for this service are all based on your loved one's needs. So what they need is done through a different assessment, and then they're given kind of a budget. That budget, those are the 3 services you're eligible for, and that case manager helps you with that through that single entry point. So children with life-limiting illness is the second waiver we'll go into tonight. My opinion, one of the saddest waivers we need, unfortunately. This waiver is built for children that have what's determined to be a life-limiting illness, which means a lot of them are deemed to maybe not live into their early teens, might live maybe up into their teens, but they're definitely looked at as due to their disability, their life is significantly limited, sadly. And as you can see, this waiver has similar criteria. They have to be under the age of 18. They have to be essentially receiving that hospital level of care. So they're getting a lot of medical care too. But they can be in the community. So they're getting a lot of that, and like they're having CNAs, they're having a nurse out there every day. It's not something you're doing every day. It's not like the Nurse Practice Act waiving thing that we talked about in IHSS. They're having a nurse there all the time, or a lot. And they have to receive at least one of the waiver benefits per month to continue to be enrolled, which we'll talk about those in a minute. But a physician has to diagnose them with a life-limiting illness. They have to be determined disabled by Social Security definition again. They must meet the financial criteria so that essentially they have Medicaid, or the family has Medicaid. They have essentially, because of that, they might be getting supplemental Social Security income, or SSI, per month. And then they themselves have less than $2,000 in assets as a child. So those are the medical and the financial criteria. The last component, so if you see what benefits they get, most of them are built around taking care of the family and taking care of them a little bit while they're here. So counseling and bereavement services, mostly for the family. Some expressive therapies, some massage therapy for your loved one, because again, if they're having major medical issues that they're in this life-limiting illness waiver, they need some care to be comfortable. Then there's some palliative and supportive care for the family, and then respite care. So allowing you to get a break from being the primary caregiver, the primary parent all the time, and having someone else be there to make sure that they're safe. Again, this waiver you apply through a single entry point. So again, if you're in the metro area, typically that's probably we recommend human services. But if you're outside that, we can always connect you with your single entry point. Most of the time, children that get into the children with life-limiting illnesses through the hospital setting, because sadly the hospitals, birth, there was some complications or things that happened. So this is a sad waiver, but it's great that we have it for families. I wish we didn't need it. So the third waiver we'll talk about tonight is the children's extensive support waiver, or what we call CES. So this is the first waiver specifically designed for kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So they either have very complex behavioral or medical conditions that require almost constant line of sight supervision. So these are the extreme cases. So that's why it's extensive supports. So it's not just my kid has autism, it's my kid has autism, and if they're left alone for more than 25 seconds, they're out the front door. They're putting their finger in the light switch or the plug. They're eating things that are inedible. They have an eating disorder like Prader-Willi that they can't control how much they eat. They have major behavioral concerns, or they have high medical needs that have also contributed to them having a disability, intellectual and developmental disability. So this waiver is once you have Medicaid. So again, your child has to have Medicaid. Once they have that, they're under the age of 18. They go through a community center board that finalizes that, makes sure they're eligible. There's essentially 3 steps they do. They do all the intake stuff to show that they have a disability and they have Medicaid. They do the 100.2 assessment, that long-term care assessment we talked about. Then they do a third for CES, which is called the CES checklist. That goes through kind of all the things your son or daughter needs help with, either behaviorally or medically, that requires them to have needing some kind of intervention every 2 to 3 hours throughout the entire day. So for this waiver, technically, your kid probably does not sleep through the night. If they do, it's either a few hours and they're up, or it's constant supervision and interventions to keep them in their room or asleep. It might be repositioning because they can't turn themselves. It might be continuing to do checks due to self-injurious behavior. It might be that they sleep for a few hours and they're up, and then they kind of sleep more in like cycles instead of all throughout the night. So that's a big component to the CES waivers. Kids, they're looking at kids that need that 24/7 support like all the time. They're not sleeping from 8 o'clock to 8 in the morning. Again, for most of this waiver, it's we talk to families about kind of what the worst night looks like, what most of your nights look like. You might have 1 or 2 where in a month where your kid's so worn out they'll sleep for 6 hours. That's pretty rare, especially for kids that have major behavioral and medical concerns that are on the CES waiver. But if you really were talking about your kid, you're doing something all the time to kind of keep them safe. There's a laundry list of benefits, as you can tell. There's more than than the other 2 waivers we talked about, because this is built to kind of keep your kid engaged and keep them moving forward. And again, the states realize the more money we give to kids, the better and maybe easier some of their behaviors that they've learned to handle and do better at as they become adults. So there's adaptive therapeutic recreational equipment and fees. This is where we can buy adaptive bikes if they need an adaptive bike or trailer thing for you to bring them with, on a bike ride or whatever that looks like. This is swing sets, not like a swing set outside, like normal, but these are adapted things. So hey, you guys buy the swing set, we'll buy the adaptive swing component that goes with that set, or inside adaptive things for them to have some recreation. This also is where we put in a thing called water safety training, which is swim lessons. It's teaching your kid how to be safe around the water, so they can pay for swim lessons through almost any rec center or like swim labs or swim safe or all those places. So talk to your case manager if your son or daughter is approved for the CES waiver. It's a big deal that they're not safe around water. Get them in swim lessons. It's a great benefit for them when they're young. Assistive technology, so just what it sounds like. They can pay for some things that your son or daughter needs to communicate better, or do get through their day. Assistive technology can be a laundry list of things. So talk to your case manager about what your son or daughter might need, and see if it's something that fits into that assistive technology component. Community connector, it's getting your kid out in the community without you, getting them out to the park, getting them out to the neighborhood stores. It's really getting them outside in their community so they can learn some of those community skills. Home accessibility adaptations, or home modifications as we used to call it, essentially is making your home adaptable to your son or daughter's needs. If they use a wheelchair, it's building a ramp so they can come in and out of their home, widening a door frame so they can go in and out of their room. If you use a track system to get, or a lift system, those are all home modifications or home accessible adaptations. Changing a bathroom so it's a zero, roll-in shower because they're mobility issues. It's very unique in terms of what home modifications can be, and it's not to ease you as the caregiver. It's to allow them better and safer access to their home. So that's one of the big deals of how you want to say it. You don't need a ramp because it's easier for you as mom and dad to roll them up the ramp. You need a ramp. They need a ramp so they can safely access their in and out of their home. So there's homemaker services like we talked about. Under this one, there's 2 levels. There's a basic level, which is basic cleaning, and then there's an enhanced level, which is more built for either dealing with bodily fluids. So your son or daughter has some issues. Maybe they're still wearing diapers and they leak a lot, or they have a very compromised immune system and they're on the floor often because of their mobility. They have pica, so they put things in their mouth often. So they need things sanitized at a different level than just basic cleaning would do. So talk to your case manager about basic or enhanced homemaker if that was something you're looking for, and cleaning the areas of the home your kid uses. Parent education is a great service. It's actually one of my favorites for families. The waiver can pay to get you trained on your son or daughter's disability. Now it has to be specific to your son or daughter's disability. So if they have Down syndrome and it's going to like this Down syndrome symposium, the waiver can pay for you to attend the symposium or the conference. They're not paying for you to get there. They're not paying for you to stay there. Excuse me. So if it's here in Colorado, you can drive to it. Great. If it's even out of state, they can still pay for the conference out of state. You have to get yourself to the conference. And we've done things like, Prater Willie conference, and seeing a family that was in Seattle. They paid for the family to access that conference once they're in Seattle, because their son or daughter had that disability. An autism conference. We paid for, when I was a case manager, I remember helping a parent get into American Sign Language classes because her daughter uses sign language, and that was the only way she could communicate with her. So mom had to learn sign language, and we were able to get it through parent education. There's a cap to this every year. I still think it's at about $1,000, but that 20, 50, 70, $80, $100 really goes a long way at times. So let the waiver, if you know early enough in advance, tell your case manager and see if the waiver, and there's money there, they can pay for it. But like something like an IEP training, they're not going to do, because that's not specific to your son or daughter's disability. Because not every kiddo that's on an IEP has a disability or has your son or daughter's specific disability. So again, it needs to be very specific to their actual disability. So professional services, that's movement, massage, and hippotherapy. Hippotherapy is horse therapy. So it's not equestrian, it's horse. And so that's a great service. It does a lot for mobility. It does a lot for, muscle tone and structure. It also does a lot for sensory. It's not just riding the horse. Some of it's caring for the animal, petting the animal. They found a lot of speech can be developed through hippotherapy by, talking and repetitive things, because horses don't care if you talk to them all the time and just keep repeating things. So hippotherapy is a great one. Massage therapy is just what it sounds like. They come to your home and give you a massage. And then movement therapy is music therapy. It's coming in, I've seen it be playing an instrument, playing music, dancing to music, lying on the floor and feeling vibrations from the music. You name it, music therapy is kind of really out there sometimes, but it's a great service for your kiddo to kind of, get some interaction, especially if they really respond to music very positively. Respite services is the, other than parent education, is the only other service that's built for you as the parent to give you a break as the primary caregiver, that you can do things either for your other children or for your own well-being. You can go to the grocery store without your son or daughter because someone's at home caring for them, respite. They can go with you to the grocery store so that they're there to make sure that your son or daughter isn't running way up and down the aisle while you're trying to read the context of some box of, whatever food you're buying, or check the, expiration date on the milk and eggs before you buy it, kind of thing. So they can, it's not that you have to leave and your respite's there. It's someone else is there caring for your child while you're doing the daily tasks of what other things you have to do. So they're watching your son or daughter while you are reading a book on the back porch, taking a break, or going to a wedding and they don't want to either go to the wedding or you don't want them to go to the wedding. It's having a date night with your partner, or a date night with yourself if that's what you really want to do. So those are the things of getting yourself, respite services. And it's probably one of the, the biggest services we use in the CES waiver is respite, is getting you a break as a parent, caregiver. You do a lot to care for your son or daughter with a disability. And so you definitely need to take a break, and respite's a great way to do that. Again, and there's a whole nother conversation with respite of how and what we do, but we can talk about that. So then specialized medical equipment supplies is pretty self-explanatory. Then vehicle adaptations is vehicle modifications. So it's, putting in a seatbelt, safety system, or, if your car needs a lift because they use a wheelchair. Those are kind of some of the things that they can do with vehicle modifications. Now back to respite for just a moment. Respite, like I said, is a service for you to get a break. And anyone can provide it that's not you or your partner. So anyone over the age of 18, grandma, grandpa, uncle, aunt, older sibling, neighbor down the street, best friend, family friend, we can hire them and get them trained to be your respite provider. And so it doesn't have to be someone that you don't know. It can be. It can be a provider from an agency, which is great. Sometimes those providers are even better than families or friends because they're there to do their job and they're there to care for your loved one. And there's not any of that inner family kind of politics sometimes. With respite, you really want to kind of throw a wide net. When you're looking for a provider, remember we talked about the RFP process last week or the week before about how to find an agency, how to get an agency to do, to do these services. With respite, you don't want to give it as like, I need 2 hours on Tuesday after school and then 4 hours on a Saturday, the third Saturday of every month. You're never going to find a provider if you're that specific. What we do with the ARC is to talk to families about throwing a pretty wide net, saying we need respite. We got 20 hours a week. And so that's what we need covered. And we'll kind of figure out the schedule once we get someone. So you can get an agency more likely, and then find a provider within that agency more likely by giving them big blocks of time. And then once you've kind of hooked a provider, like you found someone that's good, you trust it with your gut, they do really great with your kiddo, then it's time to okay, now we whittle it down to being very specific of, we need Monday from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock because our other kid has soccer practice. And we need this Saturday every month because, my partner is, travels out every third week of the month, or they're an accountant. So that end of the month and beginning of the month is really crazy for them. So we need another body in the house more often those 2 weeks and not as much the other 2 weeks. That's where once you have a provider, you can kind of whittle it and really build that puzzle to fit your son or daughter's lifestyle and your family's lifestyle. But trying to do that with trying to find someone to fit into your puzzle, it doesn't necessarily work the best. So you would really want to try and get, the more options than not. So the final waiver tonight is the Children's Habilitative Residential Program Waiver, or what we call CHRP. So CHRP historically was a waiver built for kiddos in the foster care system. So kids that were removed from their families, their parents had given up or lost their parental rights, but their kid had an intellectual developmental disability. They needed some more supports than a typical kid in the foster care system. So CHRP is what we used. To the state's credit, a few years ago, we got rid of the parental rights part of CHRP, meaning you no longer have to give up your parental rights to be able to access the CHRP program. And the big thing with CHRP is there's a residential service within CHRP. None of the other child waivers have that. So this residential service for children with developmental disabilities that have very, very high needs is really to support them so they're not having to maybe be in the foster care system or be in maybe an institution level or hospital level of care, so they can stay in the community. CHRP is now administered by your community center board, with the county still being involved a little bit, but for the most part, your community center board takes care of it. They must meet the eligibility for disability through the CCB. They must have extraordinary needs, be at risk for out of home placement, meaning you are the family's really either in some chaos or in a very stressful situation. It doesn't mean they're a bad parent, they're a bad family. It just means that due to the family dynamics and their child's disability, they're in a really kind of tough place right now. They must essentially be able to be at that level of institution, like we talked about. It's still an archaic term. They have to be under the age of 21, and the social services doesn't necessarily have to be involved at the beginning, but they at least they're discussed. They're talking about it. And again, it's not to remove anyone from their family. We want unification with families. It's to keep your family from having to social services come in and really start impacting the family in a not so great way. We want to try and figure out if we can help support the family before we do anything else. The benefits in CHRP kind of resemble a little bit of what CES looks like. There's that community connector, so getting the kid out in the there's habilitative services, which is the residential component of CHRP can be, where there's a bunch of services underneath that. So some cognitive, some communication, some emergency, some independent living training. Again, those are for as kids get older. And then the foster care system, teaching them how to be more independent, personal care, some self-advocacy, so teaching them how to really use their voice for what they want, some supervision. So essentially it's kind of taking care of them a little bit, some travel. Then there's respite. So again, you can be in CHRP and not have the rest of that habilitative stuff, or have parts of that, but not the residential part. And they're still living with you in your home, and you can get some respite. You get those professional services we talked about, hippo, movement, massage. Then these last two, this intensive support, is what it is. It's really getting a lot of people in that house, trying to get that family to really kind of get some more supports around them to really bridge that gap and help them out a lot. And then that transition, that high fidelity wraparound supports is new to CHRP also, when these changes the state made, which essentially is giving a lot of support to help a family and a kiddo transition maybe into a facility or kind of into a respite home or something for short-term, long-term, depending on the family's needs. And then also to transition them back out, and how to help them kind of adjust from in and out of that setting. So again, CHRP is a great program that doesn't necessarily mean you have to, parents are losing custody of their children anymore, or that they're, social services is coming in and they're, something's wrong with the family situation. It's that there's a lot of complex things going on within the family, and their child's disability is really kind of making that even, more exacerbated. So you're really working with them to try and get a lot of supports quickly in to help stabilize a home and help stabilize that kiddo a little more than you would necessarily get from one of the other child waivers. So with that, so with CHRP, you contact through your community center board, the CES waiver, it's community center board, or the county for CHRP also. For the other two, for life and living illness or children's HCBS, it's your single entry point. So again, if you live in Denver, Arapahoe, Douglas, Elbert, or Adams County, your single entry point is Rocky Mountain Human Services. Again, if you need to know your single entry point, if you're not in one of those counties, please feel free to reach out to either your local ARC or us here at the ARC Arapahoe Douglas County, and we can help connect you with your single entry point. You can also contact your county directly. So there's a Arapahoe and Douglas County contact information, and they can help route you to either a single entry point or maybe talk to you a little bit about what your needs are at that moment. If you need to, if you're looking at going through a community center board, so your kiddo has an intellectual disability, maybe you already have Medicaid or you're applying for Medicaid, you'd want to reach out to your community center board. So for Arapahoe and Douglas County, that's going to be developmental pathways, including the city of Aurora, even that little part that sticks into Adams County there. Rocky Mountain Human Services is Denver County's community center board. So yes, it's the same one that is the single entry point. They're just one of those agencies that kind of overlap. DDRC or Developmental Disabilities Resource Centers for Jefferson County, and then North Metro is the one for Adams County. If you live anywhere else in the state of Colorado, there is a community center board in your area. Either you can go to the state website and you will literally type in community center board. You can reach out to us at any of the ARC chapters, and we can connect you to your community center board in your area. And those are all things we want to get you, supports with and help you out with. So hopefully tonight you learned kind of what the 4 waivers are, what some of the criteria is to be eligible for them, and then what you need to do to kind of start the process of getting into a waiver. And also then what the waiver can offer your son or daughter. Now with that, you don't have to necessarily use everything within each waiver. Now, like the children's HCBS waiver, you don't have to have personal care, and you don't have to have the homemaker. You can just have the health maintenance. We're waiving that Nurse Practice Act, or you're gonna have that with personal care, or but you have to at least have that health maintenance. That's the big one for that. In CES, you don't have to utilize respite. It's there. You don't have to. You can utilize swim lessons and adaptive, getting them a bike or something, and maybe community connector, getting them out in the community, and the massage stuff. But maybe respite's not in your game plan, or maybe that's all you need is you just need a break. Like you need breaks throughout the week. So getting respite, but you don't necessarily need some of the other stuff. Your kid doesn't per se. The life limiting illness waiver is a lot different. So it's maybe you might use some of it, but most of the time it's not necessarily the waiver that we see a lot with the ARCs. So, but the thing is your child, like we talked about in that first week, is unique, and their needs are unique. And the waivers are built to kind of put them in a box or in a bucket, right? But each one of those services is a little gray. So what respite looks like to you is not necessarily what respite looks like to your neighbor. So a break for you might be that you're making dinner while someone's here taking care of your kid. Where someone else's, it might be that they literally are leaving the house because they need a break from being in the home, or, so it's all unique to you, how you utilize that waiver and what that looks like to you. So with that, I'd like to thank you again. It's Luke with the ARC Arapahoe and Douglas County, week 4. So next week, our final week, is our IEP training. So make sure you please join us then. Again, if you're watching this later, so it's on YouTube, this was recorded in the fall of 2020 during COVID. So that's why it's online, not in person. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I can either help you connect you to your local ARC, your local community center board, your local single entry point, or just maybe walk you through kind of some places to get some more information if you're interested in things and learning a little bit more. Again, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and then take any questions we have.